Gunstar Superheroes is one of the first major disappointments I experienced in my life relating to video games. I remember seeing early previews plastered online. People couldn't believe Treasure was giving us a sequel to one of the most legendary shoot-'em-ups 12 years later. Gunstar Heroes was the one game that made me truly envy Genesis players back in the day, seeing as how we were strictly a Nintendo family at the time. This legendary title was the beginning of a path blazed by Treasure. If you don't already know, you should. They have made some of the most notable and unique action games throughout the years. And it all started with Gunstar Heroes, a game so fantastic that it's no question why Sega constantly ports it to everything. Unlike Comix Zone, which I question every day. Who the hell likes this game? A lot of things stood out for me when it came to Gunstar Heroes. For one, the visuals were very pleasing. All of the characters and their personalities are conveyed extremely well through their design and mannerisms. Look at the disposable minions. Just from their faces and how they move, you can see they're supposed to be little more than goofy fodder, making it more fun to tear through them. And of course, the protagonists with their eyes always squinting in determination while you're blazing through the stage. But as soon as you recover those sweet gems, yeah, now those are faces of satisfaction. Really thinking about how expressive the characters are, I wonder if the Metal Slug games took inspiration from Gunstar Heroes. Even the bosses, you can look at Black for just a moment and see he's a conniving weasel, or how Orange likes to flex his muscles at you, the player. Look at him, staring at you right in the face, showing off his biceps. What a meathead. What else aids the visuals? The animation and effects, of course. While the game is always popping with detail from beginning to end, what really stood out were the large bosses and sub-bosses. So many of them are animated incredibly well, almost tricking the viewer that what they're seeing is rendered 3D animation rather than sprites. And I don't think anyone can forget the shape-shifting mech that Green fights with. But is that all Gunstar Heroes has to offer? Certainly not. The core gameplay was the real meat and potatoes. Blasting away at enemies with your gun feels good on its own, but the real romp comes from mixing gun combinations as well as being able to grab these fools and chuck them at other fools. Honestly, this mechanic above all else was amazing to me and still sets it apart from just about any other run and gun game out there. It could also be a saving grace for the more claustrophobic situations. Last, but certainly not least, weapon combinations. You had 2 slots, similar to Contra 3 as it lets you swap between either weapon on the fly. But that wasn't all. Pick slot 1, slot 2, or both. Meshing 2 weapons together makes for some devastating combinations. They're not always the best for all situations, maybe the homing laser, but that's what makes it worthwhile to experiment as you find weapon pickups along the way. These unique mechanics they implemented into the game, in my opinion, are what made Gunstar Heroes the legendary shoot-'em-up that it is. Blast, throw, and kick a bunch of fools away with a friend. Pure cooperative processor slowing action at some of its finest. And while you can find much of the same in Contra, as much as I love that series, it's fair to say its installments didn't have the kind of personality Gunstar Heroes did. The story itself is as basic as all of these characters' names. A team of 3 brothers were enforcers of this galaxy to keep the peace, red, blue, and green. 3 years pass and some dastardly villains sprout about to take over the world. General Grey has rounded up elite villains in order to achieve his plan for universal domination, including Green, brother and former team member. It's up to Red and Blue to save the planet with the help of their younger sister Yellow and Professor Brown. Sure. And with that, Gunstar Heroes was an amazing first step for Treasure to arrive at the gaming industry, inspiring developers to this day. As the company's career continued, they would make experimental but gratifying action games. Fast forward to 2005, Gunstar Heroes was finally coming back with a brand new game exclusive to the Game Boy Advance. I couldn't be more excited. The GBA was able to provide some great action titles, so a Gunstar Heroes sequel on it? How could it go wrong? Then the game came out. I beat it and felt unsatisfied. I was only a little 15-year-old fat turd at the time, so I kinda just accepted what I bought into and moved on. I don't think I beat it more than 2 times back when I first purchased the game. But now that I'm a late 20s fat turd, I think I've learned how to decipher this great disappointment and truly understand what I felt went wrong with the sequel, which, keep in mind, retains some of the original developers, including the main programmer. Our sci-fi action tale of Gunstar Superheroes begins. They look back at the events that transpired in the first game, about how General Grey tried using those gemstones to take over the world but died in the ordeal, how Green, the brother that betrayed Team Gunstar, sacrificed his own life to save everyone as the final act, the 11th hour. Well, now Grey apparently is still alive and trying to do the exact same fucking thing. Oh, and Green is, coincidentally, also still alive and evil again. Yeah, okay, cool. At least these two seem like new characters. Red is a girl now. Let's discuss the gameplay first and foremost. So right from the start, you'll notice the perspective is much closer to your character than the original game. This seemed to be a common thing for a lot of Game Boy Advance games. I suppose it was a generally accepted design choice for handheld titles, considering the size of the Game Boy Advance itself. Otherwise, everything seems decent. Looks and sounds fine for a GBA game. Oh wait, I already have 3 weapons? Great! Let me just mix them. Wait. The weapon swap button, it won't... Oh no. They got rid of weapon mixing. How could they do that? It was such a unique feature. What's worse is they didn't add any new weapons to compensate this issue. Still just machine gun, fireball, homing, and laser. 12 years later, and that's still it? The energy meter adds some new variety, so that's something. Something I've seen in a ton of other games, but still something. Might as well air out the rest of the drastic changes they made in the gameplay. Throwing has been removed as well. Maybe it was due to the game being in a much closer perspective? I'm not sure, I can't imagine that actually raising an issue. So why not include that? It's been replaced with a simple melee attack. Pretty big hitbox and gets the job done, but not nearly as fun. Co-op is completely missing as well. Am I even playing a Gunstar Heroes game at this point? Okay, maybe I'm being too dire, but can you blame me? Just about all the mechanics from the original game that I, and many others I'd imagine, loved have been ripped out of the sequel. Hey, we still got air kick. I also give credit where it's due. They included fixed angle shooting, which means you can fix your aiming to a certain direction while still being able to run and jump. It first appeared in Contra Shattered Soldier, and I wish this became a standard for any and all run and gun games. You hear that, Super Cyborg? Cuphead? Whatever. The animation and style leaves much to be desired as well, but I feel it's best to talk about this after having established what is probably the strangest thing about this game. It's just a remake. Certainly not story-wise, the protagonists are completely different people and the prologue brings up the original Gunstar Heroes adventure. But beyond that, it's bizarrely the same scenarios, just altered in one way or another, usually for the worse. It's really strange to me, why go this direction? I understand this is just a little Game Boy game, but that didn't stop Metroid Fusion from teeming with original scenarios, making it stand out as its own unique adventure as a sequel to Super Metroid. Maybe there was a cross-wire with communication since there were so many ports and remakes on GBA and they just went with it? I don't fucking know. With that elephant front and center in the room, that makes it easier to discuss the lack of unique style and animation when it comes to the cast and fodder of Gunstar Superheroes. This title feels the need to compare itself to the original game, so I will give it the same respect. Red looks really happy in neutral standing. Not sure why. The enemies don't seem as lively. Even as you blast away, they barely move or change their expression. The bosses themselves are much simpler in design. Take Pink for example. Similar looking mech, but her movement and attacks aren't as elaborate, so you barely need to strategize. Black doesn't really do anything either. What happened to the machine that landed on colors and threw down a die to determine attacks? Orange is barely even animated, doesn't flex in overconfidence anymore, or even do fun things like grabbing the helicopter blades like a madman. Well, it's just a jet now, but my point is they didn't make him or the situation as lively or humorous, and that goes for nearly all of the scenarios. If we pinpoint and compare how so many of these same stages were in the original, the sequel just screams bland. Remember Gold and Silver from the first game? A great final boss. He tries to attack you head on, but his true vulnerability comes from the gems, and it shows you how strongly connected this weaponized relic is with the ancient jewels. Even the gems themselves attack you throughout the fight. This time it's only the latter, and he just stands in the center of the room, doing nothing at all.
Fight your own battles, lazy ass!
Can we talk about the visuals themselves? When it came to the original game, everything had a simple shape to it, and a combination of these shapes made out unique designs of a large scale, if they weren't original creations to begin with. Meanwhile, a lot of the large sprites this time look kind of ugly. They're a little too busy and really pixelate whenever in motion, similar to old SNES games utilizing Mode 7. Even if you look at it with the original GBA resolution, in motion, most of these designs just look like coleslaw. You can look at so many other Game Boy Advance games and see they can do much better with detailed sprite designs. Hey cool, an overhead shmup portion, except you're driving this huge hunk of shit with a billion enemies firing at you. Why is the perspective completely fucked in this scenario? If the helicopter was about 1/3 of the size like any other fine shmup, I wouldn't even have brought this up. It's like they designed this specifically to not be fun. Yeah, Too easy for Treasure, creators of Radiant Silvergun and Ikaruga. Let's make the player control this humongous eyesore for 2 minutes instead. And don't even get me started with the space mission. Want to play yet another shitty shmup and get motion sickness at the same time? Have at it. At least the story is somewhat different if you play on hard mode. It's kinda bizarre how they hide away what I consider the closest this gets to being a sequel behind a difficulty setting. You'll learn a bit more about some of the characters, notably the villains. I won't go on with these details, but this made the game a little more worthwhile, I suppose. The whole thing just baffles me. This was the first Treasure game that really let me down. I've adored so much of their work leading up to this, so I couldn't help but feel betrayed. This should have been a legendary title like the first. I digress, the game still plays fine. Gunstar Heroes is not some poorly designed piece of shit. For the most part, it just breathes too much of the same air as the original title, which, in my opinion, is leaps and bounds more enjoyable. It feels very unspecial, as if they were not motivated to make it a unique entry. Not only is this touting about having the samey adventure from the original game, it has significantly less features and scenarios. Seriously, who the hell thought it was okay to design it like this? Who would ever want this game? And with that, back at the age of 15, I just put it down. And the sunshine in my life grew just a tad more dim. Not really, but I don't think I'm the only one let down by this. Despite this game getting some accolades before it launched, Gunstar Heroes quickly faded into obscurity, and I think the reasons I discuss adhere to that fact. Treasure isn't too active these days, but they still managed to make titles that had me enthralled in the experiences they served after this crap. They clearly have loads of talent within their company, and I'll continue to anticipate what they'll dish out in the future as a reminder to folks that they are still a titan of developing action games. Or maybe they'll just keep porting Ikaruga. Thanks for watching. Special shout out to our first Baron of Brutality, goes by the name of Carry On. They say people are made up of 70% water, but I know you're made up of at least 70% love. Speaking of love, this side video was made by a majority vote of my Patreon exclusive poll. Want to get the scoop on possible upcoming videos and influence what I work on next? Check out my Patreon page below. Only takes a $1 pledge to vote on the poll happening right now. No matter the smallest patron, it helps me improve myself and my work.